this video, we're ranking and explaining every single weapon damage perk in Destiny 2. There are currently over 40 of these, some are amazing and some are barely worth using. There's a lot more than just the Rampage, Kill Clip, and Multi-Kill Clip perks that we are typically thinking about. And the crazy part is that those 3 perks aren't even close to being the biggest damage buffs in the game. They're actually pretty average to below average depending on the situation. In typical Bungie fashion, there's basically no information about the specific numbers shared in-game. You really have no way of knowing if Rampage does more damage than Multi-Kill Clip on a hand cannon or if Lasting Impression is better than Cluster Bombs on rockets. So we have to scratch our heads and do a ton of testing to figure out the exact numbers. Fortunately, we have Reddit user CourtRooom to thank for putting together a massive spreadsheet that has all the testing done for us, so make sure to send them a lot of love. In this video, I want to show you all of the weapon damage perks in the game so you finally know what you've been missing out on for both PvE and PvP. Let's start from the top in alphabetical order. Adagio is the first perk on this list, which gives you increased damage for 5 seconds after defeating a target. The damage bonus felt by the weapon changes a little bit depending on which type of weapon you use. The catch though is that your weapon will fire, charge, or be drawn more slowly during the 5-second window when you have that increased damage. In both PvE and PvP, I rank this as a D tier perk because of the increased damage you get is pretty average when you look at all the perks in Destiny, and this is one of the few perks that has some actual downsides along with the benefit. In PvP, it's really bad on most primary weapons. The sudden slower rate of fire really messes up your pacing and the trade-off just isn't worth it. Missing a shot is now even more punishing because every shot on a lower RPM weapon can really be the difference between winning or losing a duel. Probably the only saving grace is on a linear fusion rifle where you can get a kill with just a body shot instead of a headshot. Also, shotguns can now get a slightly deeper one-hit kill with the bonus damage, but again, you're sacrificing your RPM to make that happen. I really can't recommend Adagio for PvE or most situations in PvP. Adaptive Munitions is a brand new perk in the Witch Queen. It's actually a really powerful one that I'm really looking forward to taking into endgame PvE this season. It improves a weapon's damage output to be more effective against energy shields that don't match its damage type. With match game being so common in endgame PvE content to bump up the difficulty, this perk is great. With a ×1 stack of Adaptive, your damage is increased by a massive 167% against mismatched shields. That's already really nice, but a ×2 stack jumps the damage up to 333%, and a ×3 stack buffs that damage to 497%. I don't know about you, but I'm definitely going to be testing this perk later in the season for Grandmaster Nightfall farming. The perk's benefit lasts until you shoot an enemy that doesn't have a shield. For PvE, this is a pretty easy A tier pick for me, but in PvP it doesn't really seem to do anything against shields or supers, so I'm going to put it in the D tier. The next perk is Adrenaline Junkie, which was recently buffed quite a bit. It now works like Swashbuckler but with grenades instead of melees. In other words, it's now Grenade Buckler. Your weapon gains increased damage and handling from kills with this weapon for 4.5 seconds. Each kill adds 1 stack of Adrenaline Junkie and then you max out your stacks at 5. Getting a grenade kill will automatically ramp you up all the way to 5 stacks. In both PvE and PvP, 1 stack will give you 6.6% more damage. 2 stacks is 13.2, 3 stacks is 20%, 4 stacks is 26.6, and the maximum of 5 stacks will buff your damage by 33.3%. The main value of this perk really centers around how often you can get those grenades back. With some of the new Void 3.0 setups, that can be extremely often, but with other builds, you might be forced to run a higher discipline to get the same benefits. Luckily, having your grenade back often in PvE is pretty much always useful, so I think this one easily earns a spot up in the A tier. In PvP, it can really vary in power depending on which grenade you choose because they all have different grenade cooldown timers. But the bonus to handling is really great and it provides that same level of buff no matter how many stacks you get. If you're running a grenade focused build, it's an incredible perk, and even without getting many grenade kills, it's still great for any weapon with low default handling. So I'm going to go A tier for PvP and maybe even a little bit higher depending on your setup. It does some great extra damage with the max stacks and the timer refreshes itself every time you get a kill. I really recommend trying some weapons that can roll Demolitionist along with Adrenaline Junkie. For example, the Judgment Hand Cannon from the Prophecy can get this combo. The perks synergize really well together. Armor Piercing Rounds is always active in a passive sense, and it actually increases the amount of damage that you deal to enemy shields by 15%. The craziest thing is that it actually works against the barriers from barrier champions. In endgame PvE content, I rank this as an S tier perk for primary weapons that have anti-barrier rounds on the seasonal artifact. Armor Piercing Rounds also shows up in the second column perk, so you're not even losing out on other damage perks in the third or fourth columns. And Armor Piercing Rounds also works great against shields, which is great because pretty much all endgame PvE content loves to hit you with that match game modifier. This is a great perk to have on your primary weapons for endgame PvE content, especially when the seasonal artifact gives you anti-barrier rounds. It also increases your range a bit, so it's not a bad perk to have in PvP either, although there's probably better options for PvP in that column like high caliber rounds or ricochet rounds. One little use case is that it does buff your damage against Titan barricade shields. So for PvP, I'm going to put it in the A tier since it does give you a range buff which is always welcome, and it doesn't directly compete with other damage perks like Kill Clip. Next up is Assassin's Blade, which I actually don't blame any of you for not knowing that it increases your sword damage. It's only an extra 15% for 5 seconds, making it one of the lower value perks on this list for raw damage increase. To proc Assassin's Blade, you need to get kills with your sword. In most PvE, swords will just one-shot kill most enemies anyway, and the chunkier ones are going to take multiple hits. So I think really the value proposition of the sword would be when the buff from killing red bar enemies would help you take down a yellow bar in a few less hits. The main thing to take into account is the availability of other sword perks to compete with it. Often there's just not many significantly better options on the table, and it can stack well in certain situations. For example, Tireless plus Assassins is a combo that actually works pretty well together. Now that Vorpal Weapon only provides a 10% buff to heavy weapons, the gap between these isn't quite as severe, so if you're able to kill an ad once in a while to buff your damage, it might actually pay off. For pure DPS, I think I'd probably go with D tier, but I think it can actually be useful in a couple of ad clear scenarios, so I'm going to give it a bump up to the C tier, which is maybe a bit generous. For PvP, there's really no benefit, so we're going to go with D tier. Bait and Switch is a brand new perk from the Vow of the Disciple raid. Unfortunately, it also has a very steep requirement. To activate Bait and Switch, you need to deal damage with all of your other stowed weapons within a few seconds. Then for 10 seconds, you deal 20% more damage. Where I can see this thing being pretty good is with loadouts that involve a lot of rapid weapon switching, things like the Wither Horde. Just shoot a couple bullets with your primary, swap to Wither Horde, stick the boss with a shot, and then swap to your heavy weapon like the new raid linear fusion rifle and enjoy 10 seconds of 20% more damage. 20% extra damage is really not bad for a heavy weapon, especially since Vorpal Weapon got nerfed, but I'd like to see this be maybe 30% more damage with all the setup you need. For PvE, I don't think I can rank this perk any higher than C tier because of all the setup it requires, and it only really makes sense to use on a heavy weapon because otherwise you're wasting heavy ammo just to proc it. For PvP, this is easily a D tier perk. The requirement to use heavy ammo just to get the damage bonus going is a no-go for me. Blunt Execution Rounds is a new perk added to the Bungie 30th anniversary update. Surprisingly, it has the highest increase in damage out of every weapon perk in the game, granting a massive 500% in PvE and a pretty high 100% damage increase in PvP. When you damage a target with your melee ability, you get increased handling and increased damage. This will last for 10 seconds or until you next fire. Just like with the Adrenaline Junkie though, this perk really suffers from the current ability sandbox with the longer cooldowns. Right now, I'll put it in the C tier for PvE because it does buff your damage a lot, but it requires that melee ability damage and only buffs up your damage for your next shot, so I don't really see it being a must-have perk for PvE. For PvP, the extra damage can help you land a kill much easier, but it's hard to keep refreshing it often, so I'm going to put it in the B tier. Since it only rolls on the Battler right now, it's really overshadowed by Kill Clip in the same column. Kill Clip does some great damage in PvP, and it's much easier to be refreshed. Box Breathing is the next perk, and it would be a good A tier perk in PvE if it didn't stop working after you shoot just one time. That alone knocks it all the way down to the C tier for me. When you aim your weapon for 1.5 seconds without firing, you get bonus range and precision damage. For snipers, that's an extra 31% damage, for linear fusion rifles it's 33%, and for scout rifles it's 66%. Again, it only works on the first shot after you awkwardly stare at your target for 1.5 seconds though. The only reason I don't have it any lower on the list is because it is a pretty good burst damage option for champions, especially since you only need 2 or 3 shots with Box Breathing active. Make sure you don't miss that first shot though, or you just lost all of your extra damage. The usefulness in PvP is pretty limited as well. The main benefit would be on sniper rifles to allow options like the 90 RPM snipers to kill a roaming super with just a headshot. Normally they would fall just short. It also gives some extra range and accuracy, which is always helpful to land that shot. Scouts also benefit a little bit here, like the classic No Feeling Scout from the Scourge of the Past raid, where that extra damage on the first bullet could allow you to 3-tap, but that's a pretty niche use case. If the Crucible keeps getting slower and slower, this might actually not be too bad of a perk because everyone's going to be holding hands in lanes like vanilla Destiny 2. So I'm going to go with the C tier for PvP because it's actually kind of useful for sniper rifles. Some of you will remember when the last Witch raid first came out, and one of the best DPS options for Riven was actually rocket launchers with cluster bombs. It feels kind of silly now looking back at how we used to just sit in rifts and would auto-load our rockets. Ever since then, cluster bomb rockets aren't nearly seen as much anymore because there's just new perks that have been added to rockets like Lasting Impression, but cluster bombs are actually still one of the highest damage perks for rockets depending on the situation. Cluster bombs used to not directly buff your damage like they do in the current sandbox. Right now, each rocket you fire releases 8 little bombs that individually increase your damage by about 3%. If you land all of the cluster bombs, it will increase your rocket's damage by 24%, which is 3% times 8 bombs. Now, if we assume that all of your cluster bombs hit and you get that full 24% extra damage, this actually makes cluster bombs the highest damage increase on rockets. Vorpal Weapon only does 10% on heavies now, and Lasting Impression is close, but it only increases your damage by 20%. However, that requirement of landing all 8 bombs is a big if. This one is really situational. Against the boss with a giant hitbox, it's still a pretty useful perk, but often you're not going to be able to realistically land all of your hits with the bombs. So I'm going to rank this one in the A tier for bosses with a pretty large hitbox and maybe B tier otherwise. For PvP, the damage increase is pretty minimal. It might sometimes help you get a kill just outside of your range, but overall it's not going to come into the picture that much, so we're going to put it in the C tier. Counterattack is another one of those sword perks that you probably aren't ever going to use. Blocking an attack immediately after guarding increases your damage by a huge 50% for 2 seconds. On paper, that sounds really good, right? That's more damage than Whirlwind Blade and more than Vorpal Weapon, the go-to sword perks. What really takes away any appeal from using this perk though is what's required to proc Counterattack. You first have to stop DPSing entirely and then guard with your sword. Then you have to get hit so you block the attack while still guarding, and then you can start dealing damage again. With how long it takes to set up Counterattack, you could already be DPSing your target with Vorpal Weapon or Whirlwind Blade. Because of this, Counterattack is a D tier perk even though it deals a lot of extra damage. The setup for the payoff just isn't worth ranking it any higher or recommending anyone to use it on their sword. Desperado is not a traditional damage perk like Kill Clip or Rampage that buffs your bullet damage. Instead, it increases your rate of fire after landing a headshot kill and then reloading. By how much? Well, a lot. So the end effect is that you deal quite a bit more damage per second. This perk is one of the rarest on the entire list. Currently, it's only available on 3 weapons, the Redirection Claymore, the Broadsword, and the Messenger from Trials. In PvE, Desperado can quickly clear an entire room of red bar trash mobs, and the DPS increase can help you melt a yellow bar too if you're wise with your target selection. Even with the nice DPS increase though, I'm going to have to put this one in the B tier for PvE. The main thing holding it back is the reliance on getting a headshot kill to activate the perk. Just try doing that against a Shank. For PvP, this perk is basically God tier. Used wisely, it has a longer activation window than Kill Clip, meaning you can wait to regenerate your health a little bit longer after a fight and still proc it, and it also lasts longer than Kill Clip so you can go on quite a killing spree. Without a doubt, this one is going into the S tier for PvP. So Counterattack was kind of a dud, but Disruption Break is a perk that I actually think a lot of people are sleeping on in PvE, especially in Grandmaster Nightfalls where there's a lot of champions. Unlike most of the perks that increase your damage, Disruption Break applies a debuff to your targets when you break their shield for 5.5 seconds. This debuff increases all kinetic damage that the target gets hit with. It also gets applied to barrier champions when you break their barrier, so you can straight up delete a barrier champion in Majors and Grandmaster Nightfalls by popping their shields or barriers and then using your kinetic special weapon. And if that wasn't good enough, it actually applies to Guardians in the Crucible. There's not a ton of situations where Disruption Break would help you secure a kill over just shooting them anyway, but there are a few cases like using it on a grenade launcher and then using the Deadman's Tail to pair with it. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this video, it's that Disruption Break deserves to be used so much more than it is currently in PvE. That's why I'm going to rank it as an S tier perk for primary weapons in PvE. Oh, and by the way, this debuff also stacks with other debuffs like Tether, Tractor Cannon, and Divinity. For PvP, it can be useful, but there's definitely better options out there, so I'm going to put it in the C tier. On Guard is an interesting perk. On paper, it does the same amount of damage as Whirlwind Blade, which is the go-to perk for pretty much every sword. All you need to do to proc that extra 30% damage is to deal damage with something else and then swap back to your sword. On Guard lasts for 1.5 seconds. This is better damage than Assassin's Blade, which only gives you 15% for 5 seconds, and it's easier to proc than Counterattack. It's an instant 30% buff, and Whirlwind Blade takes 10 sword strikes to reach that same 30%. This is a perk that I think could potentially challenge Whirlwind, but it requires a lot more work to get that higher damage, so it's probably not going to be meta anytime soon. Picture this, you use an auto-loading grenade launcher like the Wither Horde, then swap to your on-guard sword for an immediate 30% damage buff. Get some light attacks in and a heavy attack before swapping back to your reloaded grenade launcher to reapply the buff. This is basically a dream scenario for the tryhard MMO DPS rotational gods. It's a lot of work and something that we don't see all that often, but it's still really good burst damage, so I'm going to put it in the B tier for PvE. It's definitely something to keep in mind if other things change like on-guard's buff gets increased or the damage duration lasts longer. For PvP though, there's basically no reason to bother with it since sword's one shot anyway, so I'm going to put it in the D tier. I promise this next perk is going to sound weird because no one thinks that it does more damage, but Explosive Head actually increases the amount of damage that your arrows do. I know, it sounds weird because all perks tell you that this is just a small explosion that happens a little bit after the arrow lands, but it actually increases your arrow's damage by about 15% in PvE. In PvP, it doesn't noticeably change your damage though. Here's how the perk works. Explosive Head splits your arrow's damage in half. 50% of that damage is explosive damage and 50% is impact damage. But with this perk, 30% is added to your overall damage, which roughly translates to 15% because of the explosive damage versus impact damage ratio. I know this sounds complicated, but the testing shows there's about 15% more damage dealt to the body shots in PvE. Precision damage is also increased, but there's just too many variables to accurately get a good number here. Some damage gets applied if you land a headshot and some damage doesn't. The real winner here though is that it improves stagger, which is incredibly important with champions. So for that reason alone, we're going to put this in the S tier for PvE. For PvP, it's kind of a mixed bag because it both extends the time to kill, but it also makes the target flinch twice. The extra flinch isn't as useful with a slower rate of fire compared to something like an explosive payload Fatebringer, and the time to kill extension can hurt you in some scenarios, so I'm going to put this one in the C tier. Our next perk is Explosive Light. This was an incredibly powerful perk with the grenade launcher Wendigo before sunsetting first happened. Back then, picking up 6 orbs increased your damage by 75%. These days on rockets, it only does 25% more damage at the maximum stacks. It also increases your next projectile's blast radius. For grenade launcher, it buffs your damage by 40 to 55%. That just depends on which type of grenade launcher you're using. The main downside is that you'll lose your explosive light stacks if you die, but at least you can stack them up without needing any ammo. Lasting Impression does 5% less damage than this perk, but it lasts indefinitely and requires no setup to proc. So I think the big deciding factor on which perk you should use is all about how many orbs you're going to have lying around to pick up. In a well-optimized group using all of their supers, this really isn't too much of a problem, but in solo content, Explosive Light can lose some value. I'm going to place Explosive Light in the S tier for PvE. It's a top tier perk on seemingly the most meta DPS pick of the season so far. For PvP, a rocket is pretty much always going to get the kill no matter what, but if you're at the absolute furthest ranges of the blast radius, or fighting a very tanky roaming super, it might help you to secure the kill. But it does require both heavy ammo and orbs of light to be useful, so I'm going to put it in the C tier. Explosive Payload works the same way as Explosive Head, meaning that it splits your damage in 2 halves and then gives you about 15% more body shot damage against PvE enemies. In PvE, Explosive Payload can be specifically helpful for staggering champions and for extending your damage over range, since the explosive part of the damage doesn't experience any damage drop off. Most importantly though, since it hits twice, that counts as 2 hits to proc the champion mechanic effect. So for PvE, we're going to rank it in the S tier. For PvP, Explosive Payload is an easy S tier perk. The increased flinch that it provides against enemies can be incredibly rough to fight against. The explosive damage extends its effective range, and you can even damage enemies around corners thanks to the explosive blast. Firing Line is a fantastic PvE perk that's better than Vorpal Weapon in group content. Firing Line buffs your precision damage when you're near 2 or more allies. It lasts as little or as long as you want. Just stay next to 2 buddies and enjoy some extra damage. On sniper rifles and machine guns, your precision damage is increased by 20%. That's 5 to 10% better than Vorpal Weapon. For linear fusion rifles, that damage is increased by 21.3%. I love Firing Line in PvE, and I think it's an S tier perk, especially in Grandmasters where your team is going to be moving slowly together. The buff is pretty much always active. In PvP, it's the opposite and kind of like a poor man's Vorpal Weapon. Both Vorpal Weapon and Firing Line will allow you to shut down a roaming super with a precision shot from a sniper. The only difference is you need to risk your 2 teammates dying with you just to proc the effect. And in PvP, a headshot from a sniper rifle or a linear fusion rifle against a non-super enemy is going to get the kill anyway, so the extra damage really isn't doing anything. For PvE, Firing Line is 100% an S tier perk, but for PvP, I think it's D tier because there's really only one type of situation where it's useful, and there's just better perks to accomplish the same goal. So debuffs in Destiny 2 can be a little bit complicated. Instead of all debuffs stacking together, only the best debuff is what gets applied. Weaker debuffs don't do anything if a stronger debuff is already active, and if a better debuff comes along, it just replaces the weaker debuff. What's weird about Flash Counter though is that it's a 20% debuff that overrides Top Tree Sunbreaker's Hammer Strike, which is a 30% debuff in PvE. To proc Flash Counter, you need to block a melee immediately after guarding. This also disorients the attacker. Flash Counter is obviously kind of a garbage perk because you need to block a melee attack, which is something that no one is consciously thinking about doing most of the time. No one is thinking about blocking attacks with a sword because it uses up your sword energy, which is needed for heavy attacks. Even if you made it your #1 priority, it's still only a 20% debuff for 4 seconds. There's a lot of other debuff options out there that are better and just easier to proc. So this is a D tier perk that could easily be ranked a bit higher if melee blocks didn't use up any of your sword energy, so you could both apply Flash Counter's 20% debuff and then take advantage of Whirlwind Blade's 30% damage buff with a nice heavy attack. For PvP, there's basically no reason to use this, so I'm going to put it in the D tier as well. Focus Fury is another brand new perk added in the Witch Queen. Dealing half of your magazine bullets as precision damage, your damage gets buffed by 20% for 11 seconds. One important thing to note here is that the precision requirement is determined from the base magazine size, so perks that extend the magazine size like Overflow and Triple Tap don't increase the crit shot requirement. Also, you can refill the magazine without losing progress using the transversive steps on a Warlock, but sadly not with the Hunter dodge. For PvE, it's a great perk that gives you more damage for doing what you're hopefully already doing, just landing a lot of critical shots. So I'm going to rank it in the A tier. And for PvP, the perk works almost like a budget Hawkmoon. With passive playstyles on the rise, you can consistently land your headshots to work towards the damage buff, and then use that damage buff to kill a guardian who's trying to go play hide and seek. It works especially well against warlocks hiding in a healing stagger, for example. The extra damage might be just what you need to finish off that kill. I'm going to rank it in the A tier for PvP if you're a player who doesn't struggle to land your headshots, with the note that it can be pretty situational. But Frenzy is one of the most sought after perks in the game because it's so easy to proc and lasts for a very long time. But you might be surprised to hear that it's really not as good as you think it is. I don't blame you though, because Bungie didn't say anything in the perk's description that it only buffs your damage by 15%. To put that in perspective, there's only 6 perks that are lower than Frenzy. 2 of those are perks that are just always active, and one of those perks is Assassin's Blade. Sure, Frenzy is very easy to proc. You don't even need to use the weapon that has Frenzy. You just need to be in combat for 12 seconds, and then as long as you deal or receive damage every 5 seconds, the buff will refresh itself. But Frenzy needs to compete with some fantastic perks like Rampage, Kill Clip, and Multi-Kill Clip. It really comes down to what you think is better. Do you value a perk that gives you a very small bump in damage but lasts a long time? Or do you want a perk that does 2 or 3 times more damage for half of the time that Frenzy does but requires a little bit more work to proc it? The real strength of it comes in endgame activities that feature beefy enemies where it's much tougher to get some of the high damage perks like Kill Clip or Rampage to stay active. For me personally, I would rank Frenzy as an A tier perk for PvE because it's simple to proc and it lasts basically forever as long as you keep fighting. For PvP, this perk isn't quite as useful because engagements tend to be a lot more bursty in nature, which doesn't really synergize with the long activation time and requirement to be constantly in battle. Most of the time, you're going to have already won the duel or already be dead by the time it would activate unless you're fighting a large group of enemies or you're in an extended peak shotting duel. So I'm going to rank this one in the B tier. Oh, Full Court. How I wish you did more damage because you're one of the best perk ideas in Destiny. Full Court increases your grenade launcher's damage the farther that the grenade travels. Basically, it starts scaling your damage at 10 meters and maxes out at 50 meters for 25% bonus damage. Whoever at Bungie came up with this idea, my hat is off to you because that's a great way of having players directly control how much damage they deal without making you play in a really lame or completely unrealistic way. Looking at you, Assassin's Blade and Flash Counter. It's a really good idea because the further away you are, the higher you have to aim up to arc your shot. I think Full Court is a B tier perk in PvE that honestly could stand to be buffed a little bit. It only rolls on heavy grenade launchers, which if we're being honest has only really been thought about when grenade launchers were on the seasonal artifact. Full Court getting buffed will be an indirect way of buffing heavy grenade launchers in PvE without just a blanket buff to all of them. In PvP, Full Court can help you get some long range kills that would typically leave your target with just a little bit of health, but it's only featured on heavy grenade launchers for now, so it's not going to come up all that often. So I'm going to rank it in the C tier for PvP. Golden Tricorn is another new perk added in Destiny with the Bungie 30th anniversary event. Final blows grant bonus damage. While this buff is active, grenade or melee kills of the same damage type increase the weapon's damage and buff duration. Here's how Golden Tricorn works. If you get a kill with a weapon that has Golden Tricorn on it, you get 1 stack. The stack gives you 15% more damage for 7 seconds in PvE and 7.5% more damage in PvP. The 7-second timer will be refreshed whenever you get a kill, but you can't get to the second stack until you have a specific type of kill. Let's say you're using a Void weapon for example. You also need to be using a Void subclass and then get a kill with your grenade or your melee. As soon as you do that, you go on to 2 stacks of Golden Tricorn, which buffs your damage in PvE by 50% and your PvP damage by a massive 45%. The timer now also lasts 10 seconds instead of 7 and gets refreshed whenever you get a grenade or a melee kill. I would say this is a B tier perk for both PvE and PvP because it requires just a little bit too much setup work to take advantage of the max damage. But it's certainly a lot of fun to think about the potential ways you could use this thing if you can get all the stars to align. Harmony is a relatively new perk that buffs your weapon damage by 20% for 7 seconds. To proc Harmony, you need to get a kill with a different weapon and then swap to your Harmony weapon within 3 seconds. The 20% damage buff is the same in PvE and PvP. I think this is a perk you can easily live without, but it's not awful by any means. One big thing holding it back in PvE is that if you shoot a rocket or a grenade launcher and then switch before you get the kill, you won't get that damage buff. As far as primary weapons go, if I'm going to get a kill to proc a perk, then Kill Clip is just straight up better. They both have the same requirement to proc, and they take about the same time to activate. You need to swap weapons for Harmony, and for Kill Clip you need to reload. I think there's some interesting builds out there using double Harmony weapons, but for the most part there's just stronger options on the table. In PvE, Harmony is worse than Trench Barrel and 1-2 punch on shotguns, and is worse than Full Court on grenade launchers. So I'm going to put it in the B tier. For PvP though, I think it has a bit more utility in certain situations, but I'd still rather have something like Kill Clip or Rampage. So I'm going to put it in the A tier. I think the damage bonus of this perk should really be 30% to put it more in line with Kill Clip since they're basically identical in requirement. Headseeker is a D tier perk because it only buffs your precision damage by 8% after you land a body shot. To me, this is a terrible perk because it only buffs your precision damage by 1 or 2 points. It doesn't make the time to kill on pulses any faster, and at best it just makes the kill a little bit easier to get. The main difference is that maybe 1 or 2 bullets can be body shots instead of headshots and still get the kill in PvP. It essentially tries to save a partially missed burst, but there's just so many stronger options on the table. In PvE, there's no shot you want to go with Headseeker's 8% when there's just so many better options. For example, there's Frenzy with 10% and you can still hit all crits. There's Kill Clip, there's Rampage, there's One for All. Each of these perks are just much better than Headseeker in my opinion. So I'm going to go with D tier for PvE. In PvP, it can occasionally save a missed burst, so it's not awful, but I'd rather have so many other perks, so I'm going to put it in the C tier. High Impact Reserves increases the amount of damage that your bullets deal as your magazine runs out of ammo. It has no effect until you reach 50% ammo left in your weapon's magazine, and then it starts at 12.1% more damage in PvE and 3% more damage for PvP. As you go through your ammo, it starts to scale up higher and higher until it reaches a maximum of 25.6% more damage in PvE and 6% in PvP. How fast the damage ramps up depends on the type of weapon that you're using. Weapons with large magazine sizes like auto rifles and machine guns have a slower ramp up time, but other weapons like sniper rifles and fusions ramp up a bit faster because of the smaller mags. If a better perk like Vorpal in PvE didn't exist, this wouldn't be the worst perk as it does provide a nice bump to sustain DPS, but there's certainly better options in the loot pool pretty often, so we're going to go with B tier for PvE. For PvP, it can sometimes allow for fewer bullets required on a fusion rifle or fewer bullets to kill on a pulse rifle, so it's very situationally useful. If you're okay with playing with a half-empty weapon and not reloading all of the time, it's a pretty decent perk, so I'm going to put it in the B tier for PvP as well. Let me know in the comments if you ever dismantled a rocket just for not having impact casing before. Impact casing is that perk in column 2 on rockets that says it increases your rocket's direct damage. What if I told you that you probably didn't actually need to dismantle that rocket? If everything else on the rocket was perfect, you probably should have kept it until you got the perfect roll. It's pretty crazy to think that this perk only adds about 2.2% more damage. That's right, literally about 2% more damage, and you've dismantled the otherwise god roll because of that 2%. So while this is definitely an S tier perk because it's the only perk in that column that buffs your damage on rockets, you can also live without it. A rocket that does 2% less damage in PvE isn't going to make or break encounters, and you're definitely not going to get kicked from the LFG group just because it's not there. For PvP, it's really not that impactful at all. Sorry for the dad joke. So we're going to rank it in the D tier. With Kickstart, you gain bonus damage and charge rate during a slide after sprinting. When you read this perk, you might think it's kind of trash because you need to be sliding to proc the perk. Kickstart is active while you slide, but it's also active for 1 second after you come out of the slide. That means that unless you perfectly time your charge during the slide animation or at the start of that extra 1 second window, you probably won't shoot the fusion bolt out fast enough with a high impact fusion rifle. Sadly, it only works on the first shot since Kickstart goes away after 1 second. In PvE, I'm going to put this in the D tier. It's just not all that useful for DPS or ad clear when compared to perks like Vorpal Weapon or Reservoir Burst. In PvP, I'm going to put it in the B tier. It's a 20% damage buff, which is nice and may help you get an easier kill, but the sliding requirement can make it a bit harder to benefit from the perk. Kill Clip is an incredible perk that increases your precision damage by 33% and your body shot damage by 30% in PvE or PvP for 5 seconds. All you need to do for a pretty huge damage bump is to reload within 3.8 seconds of getting a kill. Super easy. On some weapons with slower reloads like 120 RPM hand cannons, it can be a bit awkward to reload sometimes, but hunters can use Marksman's Dodge or the Dragon Shadow to instantly reload and proc Kill Clip. Unfortunately, those are the only 2 ways to get around the reload animation to proc the perk. Transversive steps on a Warlock won't do the job. This is easily an S tier perk in PvP because it makes your optimal time to kill better in many situations. Instead of needing to land all precision shots, which requires really good aim, you can be a little sloppy and throw in some body shots too. For my fellow PvP fans out there, all you need to know is this is one of the best perks for PvP on primary weapons. For PvE, Kill Clip is really nice as well, but it's a bit more annoying to keep it constantly procced since you need to be reloading often, whereas something like Rampage can just keep shooting without a reload requirement. So I'm going to go with the A tier for PvE. Lasting Impression is a top tier perk for rocket launchers. It causes rockets to attach on impact and then detonate after a short delay. It also increases the blast radius and damage. The way this works is that you shoot your rocket and it attaches to the target. 3 seconds later, the rocket will detonate. All things said and done, you're looking at 20% more damage for your rocket. But remember back when I was talking about cluster bombs, those deal 24% more damage in the perfect situation where all of your cluster bombs hit the target. Lasting Impression, on the other hand, is pretty difficult to mess up. You either hit the target and get your bonus 20%, or you miss and you get nothing. The one exception is with champions who can occasionally shield just before that rocket explodes because of the delay. This is an S tier perk for PvE because it's pretty much free extra damage, and now that Vorpal Weapon only does 10% for rockets, I think it's a no-brainer to go with Lasting Impression. The only damage perk on rockets that is a little bit better in my eyes is Explosive Light, which I do personally prefer because of the sometimes awkward moments with Lasting Impression. I'm just not really a big fan of that delayed explosion. Also, make sure that your PvP rocket doesn't have Lasting Impression on it, or you'll shoot a rocket at an enemy guardian that won't explode until they kill you. I mean, it's definitely really funny when you do get a kill with this perk because the person you killed probably didn't see it coming, but it's also really awkward when you shoot your rocket thinking it's going to explode and it just doesn't. So we're gonna go D tier for PvP. Multi-kill clip is a perk that many of you love because it's like a weird love child between Rampage and kill clip that's sometimes even better than the parents. Reloading grants increased damage based on the number of rapid kills before you reload. If you reload after 1 kill, your damage is increased by 17% for 5 seconds. After 2 kills, it's 33%, which is the same amount of damage that both kill clip and Rampage max out at. And if you get 3 kills, you're doing a very nice 50% extra damage for 5 seconds. Like kill clip, you can refresh your multi-kill clip buff just by getting more kills and reloading again. In fact, it's even easier because you don't have to worry about the timer quite as much as kill clip for perfectly looping the perk. Technically speaking, kill clip can also be refreshed early by swapping weapons and timing it perfectly, but refreshing multi-kill clip is just a walk in the park in comparison. One thing to be aware of though is you can override a higher value stack with a lower stack. So if you get a ×3 stack and then you get 1 kill and reload, you've removed the ×3 stack and now you only have ×1. I think multi-kill clip is an A tier perk for both PvE and PvP. It's not the best in slot for either, but it's a very good damage perk and it lasts for a solid amount of time, and you can use it to get a higher stack once you start slaying out. The next perk is One for All, and I think this is another one of those heavily slept on perks. It does more damage than both kill clip and Rampage, it also lasts twice as long as both of them, and it has a pretty easy activation, especially in PvE. To proc One for All, you just need to hit 3 targets within 3 seconds of each other. You don't need to get a kill, you don't even need to reload. You just need to hit 3 different PvE enemies or 3 different guardians and get 35% more damage for your next 10 seconds. I think it's easily at least an A tier perk for PvE, especially in higher difficulty modes where getting a kill on a tanky enemy isn't quite as easy. And in 6v6 Crucible, it can be viable as well, albeit a little bit tough to proc consistently. The value of the perk does diminish quite a bit in 3v3 modes though, so I'm going to go C tier overall for PvP. The main downside outside of the difficulty in getting the perk to proc in the first place is that you can't refresh the buff's timer by hitting 3 enemies again. To refresh the perk, you need to wait for the full 10-second timer to run out and then hit your 3 different targets all over again. 1-2 Punch is probably the best shotgun perk in Destiny for PvE, and it has a lot going on. To keep it simple though, know that 1-2 Punch buffs your normal melee by 200% against miners, elites, and mini-bosses. Against bosses and vehicles, your normal melee does 350% more damage for 1.5 seconds. As long as all of your pellets in your shotgun hit, you'll get these numbers. For charged melee abilities, some do a flat 200% more damage to whatever enemy they hit. Others do 200% to all enemies, except for bosses they do 350%. And then there's the Revenant's Wither Blade, Dawnblade's Celestial Fire, and the Shadebinder's Penumbral Blast, which don't get any increase from the 1-2 Punch. I mean, can you imagine how overpowered that would be in PvP? You barrel stuff your shotgun into one guardian to kill them and then proc 1-2 Punch. Then you immediately throw a Celestial Fire down a hallway and blow up a second guardian in one hit. I'm kinda glad that's not a thing because top tier Dawnblade definitely doesn't need anything else going for it. 1-2 Punch is an S tier perk for PvE, assuming you're running a melee focused build, but I would say D tier for PvP. If there's one perk we all know and love on this list, it's Rampage. Don't get me wrong, Rampage is a fantastic perk, but maybe it's just a little bit overhyped. I think a lot of the love surrounding Rampage is thanks to how strong it was when it first came into the game. Back in vanilla Destiny 2, Rampage used to deal 20% bonus damage after your first kill. Then when you got a second kill, your damage was buffed to 41%, and after 3 kills it maxed out at 66%. That's 66% more damage that could last basically forever because the perk just kept refreshing itself. Long ago, Rampage was nerfed pretty hard to where it stands now, which is about half as powerful as it used to be. Right now, Rampage ×1 is only 10%, ×2 is 21%, and ×3 is 33%. Rampage lasts for 3.5 seconds unless you have a Rampage spec mod, which increases the timer to 4.5 seconds. It's still a great perk because you can infinitely refresh the buff as long as there's still enemies to kill. This adds a lot of value, especially for PvE scenarios against weaker enemies that allow you to keep that chain going. So even after the nerf, I'm going to rank it in the S tier. For PvP, it's a great perk in some situations like using a 390 RPM pulse rifle since that small extra damage will allow you to 2 burst. And it certainly was an incredibly good perk on 120 RPM hand cannons before they got recently nerfed. I think overall kill clip is a little bit better for PvP, but Rampage is still solid in many situations, so I'm going to rank it in the A tier. Oh, and by the way, the original overpowered Rampage is still available in Destiny. It's only found on the Huckleberry exotic SMG. That's why a lot of players swear by the Huckleberry in PvE and never take it off. Recombination is a really nice perk that so far only rolls on the Heritage Shotgun and the Succession Sniper Rifle from the Deep Zone Crypt Raid. Getting elemental kills with your special or heavy weapon will earn you 1 stack per kill. You max out stacks at 10 kills. Then you unleash them all through one massive shot. On the Heritage Shotgun, times 10 recombination increases that one shot by 88% in PvE and 50% in PvP. On the Succession Sniper Rifle, times 10 recombination increases that one shot by 101% in PvE and again 50% in PvP. This perk was thirsted after really hard when the Deep Zone Crypt Raid first came out. Everyone was farming Spoils of Conquest to get a recombination Heritage or Succession. I think it does nice damage, but only for one shot. I'll rank it as an A tier perk for PvE because it is a really nice sudden burst of extra damage in PvE, and that can be really useful for burst DPS. And on the two weapons that it can roll with, it's actually the best option on the table for that slot. In PvP, I'm going to rank it in the C tier because technically the stacks can help you get an easier kill, but realistically it's a fairly large requirement to just slightly buff the damage on your other weapon for each kill. But hey, if you manage to hit some nasty clips with Recombination, tag me on Instagram so I can check it out. Redirection is a perk that's only found on the Posterity and the Trustee, the hand cannon and scout rifle that drop in the Deep Zone Crypt Raid. Redirection works by buffing the damage you deal against high tier miners, elites, mini-bosses, and bosses or vehicles based on how many trash enemies you hit. For each tick of damage deal on a miner enemy, you get 1 stack of Redirection. For 1 stack of Redirection, you deal 20% more damage against powerful enemies, 2 stacks is 40%, 3 stacks is 60%, 4 stacks are 80% more damage, and between 5 and 20 stacks you deal 100% more damage. Redirection is a really interesting perk that can deal a lot of extra damage, but I don't like that it first requires you hitting a minor enemy and then moving on to a more powerful one. It just requires a little bit too much micromanaging to fully optimize your DPS and can be incredibly situational. If you're up for the challenge, this could be really fun to try and master in PvE. I think it's a C tier perk since it requires a bit too much setup to be used in most situations. For PvP, it doesn't really seem to do anything, so we're going to rank it in the D tier. Reservoir Burst buffs your damage by 25%, but only when your magazine is full and only for the first shot. This means that it's hard to get a ton of value for it in PvP because you're going to need to pick up a lot of ammo to get that full magazine. This is especially hard now with the limitations on scavenger mods. The extra damage can help you land a kill easier though if you're able to hoard enough ammo. In PvE, where special ammo is much more plentiful, you can shoot a fusion rifle bolt out while your magazine is full, get the extra 25% damage, and then reload your fusion so it's back to a full magazine and fire again for the Reservoir Burst to proc. As far as fusion rifles go, it's definitely a lot of fun, so I'm going to rank it in the B tier for PvE and C tier for PvP. Shattering Blade buffs your damage by 67%. You just need to use a heavy attack and have that heavy attack use up the rest of your ammo. The 67% is huge, but that's basically a one-time use. You use it when you're at the last bit of your ammo, and then that's it until you find some more purple bricks. Shattering Blade is one of the highest damage buffs in the game, but it's a D tier perk no matter which activity you run. In a DPS race to anything with a decently large health pool, it will always lose the Vorpal Weapon or Whirlwind Blade. It might even lose out to some really whack sword perks like Counterbalance and On Guard, and if you're paying attention, you know how little I think of those two perks. In PvP, swords are pretty much always a one-hit kill, so this doesn't help you much either. I'm going to rank it in the D tier for PvP. Spike grenades offer a flat, always active 50% more damage to your grenade launcher, but there is a catch. For now, this only applies to the direct impact part of the grenade, not the explosion damage, so in reality, the buff felt in-game is quite a bit smaller than that 50%. For straight up utility, I think blinding nades or concussion grenades are usually a more useful option for PvE. But for adding extra damage, spike grenades is not a bad perk, especially since it's the only one that provides extra damage up front, so I'm going to put it in the A tier. I could maybe even see S tier when it's paired with Vorpal Weapon. For PvP, you're probably not going to land a ton of direct impact shots with a grenade launcher. Realistically, the point of a grenade launcher is to tag your enemies with a lot of damage from the explosion, especially around cover. And guess what? Normal special grenade launchers one-shot kill in PvP anyway as long as you're not running proximity grenades. So the only benefit here is if the enemy has some sort of overshield or damage resist, or maybe they're in their super, but even then it's probably not going to get the kill anyway. So for PvP, I'm going to rank it in the D tier. Surrounded is a surprisingly nice perk considering how rarely I actually see it getting used. It's pretty common on shotguns and swords, but it's also been known to roll on some primary weapons as well. When 3 or more enemies are within 8 meters of you, Surrounded gives you bonus damage. By default, Surrounded buffs your damage by 25% on swords and everything else is buffed by 30%. When you use Surrounded Spec though, it adds 10%, so 35% on swords or 40% for everything else. Also, when using Surrounded spec, you keep the buff going for 1.5 seconds after there are no longer 3 or more enemies within that 8 meter range. Surrounded is really easy to proc. Just ape yourself into the middle of a pack of enemies and there you go, increased damage. It doesn't last very long once you start killing PvE enemies, even when it lingers for that 1.5 seconds afterwards. It is nice that you get a pretty big damage buff for very little or even no work at all, but in more difficult content, the absolute last thing you want to do is be in close proximity to the bullet sponges you run into with a million Grandmaster modifiers on. I'm going to put it B tier for PvE. It's not bad, but there's definitely better options out there. For PvP, I think it's a D tier perk because you're just not going to want to put yourself in that much danger to get it activated. Swashbuckler is basically a better version of Adrenaline Junkie because you can just get a melee kill to proc it instead of needing to get a kill with your Charge the Grenade ability. You gain increased damage from melee kills and kills using your Swashbuckler weapon. Each weapon kill gives you 1 stack, but getting a melee kill instantly shoots you up to the maximum of 5 stacks of damage. A times 1 stack buffs your damage up by 6.6% for 4.5 seconds, times 2 is 13.2%, times 3 is 20%, times 4 is 26.6%, and the maximum of 5 stacks is a nice 33.3% extra damage. Not bad. Swashbuckler is a pretty average perk in terms of damage, but it can be one of the fastest ways for a weapon to get a really nice boost in damage if you get a quick melee kill. And once you get it going, every weapon kill refreshes your buff in that 4.5 second timer. I would say it's a B tier perk for PvE and either B or potentially even A tier for PvP because it can often yield the same results as Rampage but with a longer duration and the ability to reach max stacks immediately with a melee kill. Like Explosive Payload and Explosive Head, Time Payload also buffs your damage. Your damage gets split like those two perks, but it's 55% explosive damage and 45% impact damage. Because of the split, it does roughly 16% more damage for body shots in PvE. Also, like other perks, there's really too many variables to tell exactly how much it does for precision shots in PvE, but it does increase it. For PvE, I rank Time Payload in the S tier. Like other explosive perks, it increases stagger and improves your effectiveness against champions, which is a huge benefit. In PvP, I think it's an A tier perk because of the extra flinch that it deals. Time Payload on a 140 RPM hand cannon will produce 6 total flinch events while landing your 3 tap. It's incredibly annoying to play against, and the explosive part of the damage also doesn't experience any damage fall off. Trench Barrel is another perk that takes me back to a completely different era of Destiny. Comment down below if you were around when the Trench Barrel Ikelos shotgun was the king for DPS. Long before slug shotguns were the top DPS in PvE, fire teams would surround a boss in a circle, punch away, and then pump out more damage on rapid fire shotguns. After nerfs in many different DPS metas, Trench Barrel is still a pretty decent perk. It increases your damage by 50% for 5 seconds or until you fire 3 shots. It also buffs your handling and reload speed while it's active. In the grand scheme of weapon damage perks, Trench Barrel is an above average buff, but because it lasts only for 3 shots before it ends, I think it needs to go in the C tier. It's not bad, but the meta just really hasn't favored shotguns in PvE for a pretty long time. In PvP, it's a D tier perk that you really shouldn't use because there's just way better perks for a shotgun in that column, and those perks are active much more often. It also procs only from your neutral melee, not a ranged melee. Trench Barrel is a bright reminder that Destiny 2 is an entirely different game from Forsaken, but it's still pretty fun to remember those old metas of punching and shooting your way through bosses. Unstoppable Force is a brand new perk found only on glaives. Blocking damage with your shield increases projectile damage for a short time. Unstoppable Force buffs your glaive's damage by 30% once you proc it. Personally, I'm not really a big fan of this perk. 30% more damage is really nice, but it only works for glaive projectiles. I don't know about you, but I love spamming melees with a glaive in PvE. If Unstoppable Force worked on melees too, this perk would be awesome. It would be a lot more fun if you could block an attack in PvE and then start smashing some thralls. It also doesn't feel great with how small the magazine sizes tend to be on glaives. By the time you've shot a couple of your buffed up projectiles, it's time to reload again already. The extra damage is nice and is pretty easy to proc, but with melee damage not being buffed, I'm going to rate Unstoppable Force in the C tier for PvE. For PvP, glaives are kind of in a weird state right now, and I'm not really sure how they're going to shake out in the meta eventually, but my first impressions is that they don't really seem like much of a contender. A normal projectile attack in PvP does 131 damage, but that's buffed up to 170 with the perk active. This is a lot of damage and it will one-shot your opponent if they have even just a little bit of damage when you hit them. In a way, it's almost like having the Middle Tree Arcstrider super where you reflect the damage back at the caster. The problem is that you have a really short window to pull this off because you need to fire it almost instantaneously while you're blocking. If glaives are better in PvP, maybe I could rate this perk higher, but for now, we're going to put it in the C tier. I don't think I need to tell you that Vorpal Weapon is an S tier PvE perk even if it did just get nerfed a bit. Before the nerf, Vorpal buffed primary, specials, and heavies all the same amount while shooting bosses, vehicles, or guardians in Crucible using their supers. Now the amount that Vorpal Weapon deals depends on the type of weapon you're using and whether you're playing in PvE or PvP. In PvE, Vorpal buffs heavy weapons by 10%, specials by 15%, and primaries by 20%. I think Vorpal Weapon really stands apart from other perks when it's on a primary or a special weapon and as a champion killer. I mean, Dead Man's Tale with a Vorpal Weapon dealing 20% more damage to champions and nightfalls is just awesome. That's a 20% buff that's always active against bosses and champions, and you don't even need to jump through any hoops to proc it. In PvP, all weapon types are buffed by 15% against supers, which again is insanely good on the Dead Man's Tale. It also allows 90 RPM snipers like the Eye of Soul to one-shot kill a roaming super. I'll rank it in the A tier overall because it's really only useful against supers, but wow, does that make a huge difference when you're about to face 3 of them in Trials of Osiris. Whirlwind Blade is an S tier sword perk that buffs your sword's damage more than Vorpal Weapon once you reach maximum stacks. Vorpal Weapon's only a 10% buff on heavies since the Vorpal changes, but Whirlwind Blade climbs all the way up to 30%. Each rapid sword strike increases your sword's damage and lasts until you stop hitting a target for 1.5 seconds. Guarding also stops this buff. Each swipe of a sword gives about 3% since it takes 10 total hits to get to 30%. A lot of you out there probably have Whirlwind Blade Falling Guillotines because it's always been the go-to sword perk since Falling Guillotine was first the boss DPS option. With how overpowered Falling Guillotine used to be, you'd think that Whirlwind Blade did more than just 30%. I'll rank it in the A tier overall. For PvP though, it doesn't really have any value, so I'm going to rank it in the D tier. As you can imagine, this video took an insane amount of time to put together and it involved my awesome writing and editing team, and the sponsor of this video is helping me afford to pay them. Manscaped has a brand new product line designed to keep you looking and feeling your best this season. The Ultra Premium Collection is an all-in-one skin and hair kit. I've been using it for about a month now and I'm really impressed. All of the products smell absolutely fantastic and the quality of the packaging is definitely S tier. It's some seriously premium stuff. In the box you'll get the Manscaped 2-in-1 shampoo and conditioner, the body wash with a refined cologne scent, the hydrating body spray, a stick of aluminum-free deodorant, and a free gift, some moisturizing lip balm. The whole package is designed to help you get all cleaned up with our 5 steps in 5 minutes approach. This is going to help you save some serious time and still be looking and smelling great. And if you like the products, you can opt in for the Manscaped Peak Hygiene Plan to make sure you never run out. Just pick a replenishment option that works for you and get everything delivered straight to your door hassle-free. If this sounds like a good deal, then head over to manscaped.com and use promo code Pattycakes for 20% off your order plus free international shipping. Thanks again to Manscaped for sponsoring the video. Let me know in the comments below which perks you're going to start using more often now that you've seen this list. I'm really hoping to see some of you say Disruption Break and One For All because I think those 2 perks in particular don't get nearly as much love as they deserve. Videos like this take an incredible amount of work from myself and my amazing team. If you want to support us directly, the best way to do so is through Patreon. You can join us at patreon.com/pattycakesgg. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and give a like. And up next, I think you'd enjoy my video ranking every single exotic weapon in PvP. Part 1 is on the top right of your screen and also linked in the description.